Hi, I'm Dana Archer, and I'll be discussing with you social interaction, which is a cognitive development theory by Lev Vygotsky. Lev Vygotsky was a Russian lawyer turned psychologist. He trained in cognitive development, which is the process of acquiring intelligence and advanced thought and problem solving from infancy. Lev Vygotsky really was excited and wanted to learn a little bit more about how children learned. And so we're going to look at his three major components in just a second. But first, let's look at some pictures. Social interaction plays a fundamental role in the development of cognition, he said. Looking at the pictures of these children, what are some of the first things you observe them doing? How might that contribute to their overall cognition or any part of their learning journey? The three major components of Vygotsky's theory of social interaction include the role of social interaction in cognitive development. The second is the role of the more knowledgeable other, or MKO. And the third is the zone of proximal development and finding how we learn inside of that zone of proximal development. Social learning and cognitive development anticipates the development of the child. Vygotsky said every function in the child's cultural development appears twice. First on the social level, and later on the individual level. First, people come along and the interaction occurs between them, and that's where this child begins to learn and think. And the second time, it's where they start to internalize that knowledge. What are some of the ways that you have seen or you could see this happen inside of your classroom? How might you encourage that? As young children tend to be naturally curious beings, it stands to reason that they become very engaged and very active and interested in their own learning. Just think of that toddler who comes to you and asks you why a million times. That's all part of their cognitive development. They want to know. They're exploring, they're growing, and they're changing right in front of our eyes at that point. Learning through social interaction occurs as our theories help us to understand how people learn from each other and helps teachers create active learning environments in our classrooms. And isn't that what we all strive for? We want our kids asking questions. We want them thinking. We want them talking to each other. We want a wonderful classroom community for our students. Vygotsky suggested that learning takes place through interactions children have with others. You can see here in this picture, we have sharing of ideas, collaboration, discussion, community, brainstorming, and interaction, all wrapped up in that big warm hug that we hope our kids can eventually give themselves and each other. The more knowledgeable other is someone who has a little more understanding of a given topic or skill or even a process or concept. Which pictures do you see here you think would be examples of the more knowledgeable others? Now I'd like you to consider how those MKOs or more knowledgeable others might be able to help the person that they're supposed to be slightly ahead of in terms of knowledge. Great. Lastly, now I'd like you to consider who might be a more knowledgeable other for you, and how might they help you, and how did they help you in your development? As we look at this picture here, you can see a teacher or parent on the outside. We can see the child here. There's some learned tasks on the inside. We have the child's inner voice, the interaction between the two. On the outside of this circle, there's the tasks not learned or something that's outside of that person's ability. And then on the inside are things that the child can already do. And right in here is something we call the zone of proximal development. It's exactly where teaching meets learning. This, as I said, the area is known as the zone of proximal development. The concept relates to what a child already knows and what a child has yet to understand or master. The learning occurs somewhere between the guidance and that independence. And I'd like you to, at this point, look at these two pictures, analyze them, and figure out why you think that might be the case. Great. What activities or techniques do you think you could use to help get your students from that area where they can't do anything yet all the way to what can I do? What can you do in that zone of proximal development? When planning lessons for students using this theory, it's very important to use sensitivity. After all, your student doesn't always need that direct instruction at this point, and they're not at the point where they can do it themselves. But this is where critical thinking and learning and excitement takes place. Skills should be developing that the students will use on his or her own. And certainly we can see with the picture here, the child's looking up at a table with some flour and some eggs. Then he watches perhaps mom start cracking the egg. Then he watches her mix it. And finally, by following mom's model, he's able to bake a cake on his own. CPD in my classroom is based on a technique I learned at a workshop called Woodles. Woodles is out of Rice University, and it's a vocabulary acquisition technique. So what I do is my students haven't had any exposure to the vocabulary at all at the point that they get these Woodles, and I put out materials and or pictures at this point. I give them some guiding questions, and then I set them off to learn on their own. I do jump in every now and again to help guide them or maybe correct some misconceptions, make sure they're on task for sure. But in this case, I gave my students an activity where I wanted them to understand the law of superposition, which is a law in geology that relates to the youngest layers of the earth being on the top and the oldest layers of the earth being on the bottom. So I decided to give them some Legos, and the instructions they were given, along with just a pile of Legos, were to build a small structure with the provided Lego bricks. Then on their paper, write the name of the station, which was the law of superposition. And then they needed to describe which layer was placed first and where it was placed in relation to the last brick placed. And then I asked them why they thought that happened. We came back to it multiple times. We came back to it after they finished the activity, and I'd say to them, remember, when we're looking at the law of superposition, where was that first brick placed? How old was it in relation to the one on top? Then I asked, could they place it in the middle, and how would that work? So it really encouraged them to continue thinking, and it encouraged them to be a little critical of the activity. The benefits of Vygotsky's social interaction in the classroom is it provides groups for peer instruction, and it provides a great space for collaboration. The environment in the classroom becomes one of collaboration and congeniality, and after all, isn't that what we really, really hope for in our kids? We want them to work together, we want them to talk to each other, we want them to be giving and caring people, and we want them to hit that highest level of learning that we're always striving for, where they're teaching others in order to develop themselves better. This leads ultimately to a wonderful class community. Now, at this point, I'd like you to think of how you might be able to build that class community and what might make it stronger. Great. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. I hope that this was a useful and beneficial presentation for you. I look forward to any of your questions, and I'll do my best to answer them.